Hey there, my name is Mike Parejo. I'm on staff here at Rainier Christian Church, and thanks for joining us today. A lot of people wouldn't want to do what I do in terms of standing up in front of people and talking, or getting in front of a camera and having to record something. But for me, it's not that big of a deal. But I would never, ever go willingly into a talent show. There's certain things that I do not want to do, and so I am always super impressed by people who willingly go on talent shows, especially people that want to go in front of millions of people and sing or dance or tell jokes or whatever, and they'll go on, whether it's America's Got Talent or The Voice or American Idol or any of the 8,000 talent shows that are on TV right now. And I'm really impressed that they're willing to do that, because the vast majority of those people are going to be told you don't have what it takes to be a star. But there are some people that when they start singing or dancing or doing whatever they do, you can tell right off the bat that they've got it, whatever it is, and it's awesome. And so several years ago on America's Got Talent, there's this guy named Sal from New York. Because of course, how is a guy named Sal not going to be from New York? But he was on America's Got Talent, and he busts out singing some Frank Sinatra, and I just want you to check it out right now.
And now the end is near, and so I face the final curtain. My friends, I'll say it clear, I'll state my case, of which I am certain. I've lived this life that's full. I've traveled each and every highway, and more, much more than this. I did it my way. Let me tell you. For what is a man? What has he got? If not himself, then he has not to say the things he truly feels, and not the words of one who kneels. The record shows Sal took all the blows. I did it more.
So, that's incredible. What he just did in front of not only 4 judges who are really famous, but an entire audience full of people and millions of people watching at home. What he just did is incredible. It's exciting to be able to watch something like that and to see all the judges stand up and give him a standing ovation along with the entire crowd. And I think part of the reason for that reaction really comes down to the song that he sang, My Way by Frank Sinatra. And granted, he sang, unbelievably well, but that song, there's something about My Way that I think just resonates deep inside people. And so if you're young and you've never heard that song before, okay, you can be excused from that. But for most of us that have heard that song, there's just something about it. Something, because we like this idea of being able to say, I did it my way and nobody else's. But I also want us to think about kind of the opening words to the song as he sings, and now the end is near, and so I face the final curtain. And just this idea of somebody who's come to the end of their life and they've got something to say about this is how I chose to live my life. Now, we've come to the end of our teaching series called Don't Miss It. We have been studying the parables of Jesus as they have been found in the Gospel of Luke. And we've spent a bunch of time studying. And today we're coming to the final parable that Luke records of Jesus. And it's in Luke chapter 20. So if you have your physical Bible, if you have the Bible on some sort of an app, a device, you can go ahead and find your way to Luke 20 right now. We're going to get there in a moment. But the passage that we're going to be looking at today, it takes place during Holy Week or Passion Week, which is the last week of Jesus's earthly ministry. And so he's heading into the capital city of Jerusalem for the very last time, because he's going there, and that is going to be the week that he is arrested and put on trial and executed by crucifixion. So he's heading into Jerusalem, and Jerusalem is the capital of the Jewish nation. It is the location of the temple, the what they consider to be the dwelling place of God himself. And it's the location of all the major Jewish leaders, the chief priests and the teachers of the law and many of the Pharisees. And these religious leaders, even prior to Jesus entering Jerusalem for this Passion Week, like prior to this, they did not like him. They were not fans. They felt threatened by him and the following that he was gathering. But this moment now, when he is entering into Jerusalem, this is the moment where they begin to get truly, truly desperate, because they see how the crowds are reacting to Jesus as he's entering into Jerusalem. And so I just want to read that really quick from Luke chapter 19. When he came near the place where the road goes down the Mount of Olives, the whole crowd of disciples began joyfully to praise God in loud voices for all the miracles they had seen. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest. So after 3 years of watching Jesus' public ministry and seeing how he's gathering kind of the hearts of the people to himself, these Jewish leaders, they turn to the absolute unthinkable. Again, keep in mind, these are the leaders of the Jewish people, and this is where their minds go in Luke 19:47. Every day he was teaching at the temple, but the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the leaders among the people were trying to kill him. The religious leaders want Jesus dead. Okay, the whole thou shalt not kill thing, still valid, okay? But despite all that, they want Jesus to die. And Jesus knows that. He knows this is what they want. He willingly enters into Jerusalem knowing that they are plotting his death. And he's told his disciples on several occasions that he was going and he was going to die. And so today we're going to study, in our last parable here in this series, we're going to study a parable that he tells during this Passion Week, during this particular Holy Week. Again, a parable that's spoken in the capital of the Jewish people, a parable that is spoken in the presence of the chief priests and the teachers of the law. And unlike some of Jesus's previous audiences, when he was speaking to them, a lot of them, they would listen to a parable and it would go right over their heads. They didn't get it. The audience that he's speaking to today, they're going to understand exactly what he is talking about, and nothing's going to get over their heads. They're going to understand exactly what Jesus is saying to them. And so we're going to begin with the first section of the parable, this brilliant parable that Jesus teaches that really addresses the past, the present, and the future of God's people. And so we're going to pick it up in Luke 20, starting in verse 9. He went on to tell the people this parable. A man planted a vineyard, rented it to some farmers, and went away for a long time. At harvest time, he sent a servant to the tenants so they would give him some of the fruit of the vineyard. But the tenants beat him and sent him away empty-handed. He sent another servant, but that one also they beat and treated shamefully and sent away empty-handed. He sent still a third, and they wounded him and threw him out. So in this parable, the man planting the vineyard represents God and his gift of the promised land to his people. And we see this is backed up from Isaiah chapter 5, where it says, "The vineyard of the Lord Almighty is the nation of Israel." So for God, what is he asking of his people? In the parable, the owner of the vineyard sends these servants to kind of collect part of this harvest. Well, what is God asking of his people? Well, he's looking for a spiritual harvest, essentially. He's looking for the obedience and the faithfulness of his people. And yet what has happened over the course of time is that God's people, throughout the Old Testament, they've kind of moved away from giving God any sort of a spiritual harvest. They have moved on to worshiping other gods, the false gods of the nations that surrounded Israel, and they begin to worship all these false idols, and they give glory to these things made of wood and stone, and they just essentially decide, we're going to decide what's right for us. We get to decide our own version of truth. And so God, to get their attention, he sends messengers to them known as the prophets. But just like the farmers in the parable that send away this landowner's servants, that God's people overall reject the message of the prophets. One of the prophets, Jeremiah, we see this in Jeremiah 25. And though the Lord has sent all his servants, the prophets, to you again and again, you have not listened or paid any attention. So God sends prophet after prophet after prophet to his people, desiring to speak to them, desiring to speak to their hearts so that they would turn their hearts back to him. And while there may be brief change, they always go back to their old ways, and they're content to living however they see fit. And there are even times where the people openly challenge the things that the prophets say. Again, the prophets, these are mouthpieces for God, and they are challenging it. We see in the last prophet that God sends, this man named Malachi, we see the following in Malachi chapter 1. I have loved you, says the Lord, but you ask, how have you loved us? So God's chosen people, whom he has literally moved heaven and earth to provide for them, they are now questioning, does God even really love us? And then there's 400 years of silence. There are no prophets from Malachi all the way up until John the Baptist, 400 years later. And it's at that point in time that God sends his son. And he shows them the extent of his love. How have I loved you? Let me show you. And he sends his son, Jesus. And this is what Jesus then addresses in the next section of the parable. And so we're going to pick it up in verse 13. Then the owner of the vineyard said, what shall I do? I will send my son, whom I love. Perhaps they will respect him. But when the tenants saw him, they talked the matter over. This is the heir, they said. Let's kill him, and the inheritance will be ours. So they threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. So this parable takes a very dark and unexpected turn. The owner of the vineyard sends his beloved son to the tenants, which is a very clear reference to God sending his beloved son, Jesus, to earth for his people. But the tenants in this parable, they've gotten something very backwards. Instead of honoring this son of the landowner and respecting him, they somehow think that the son is the only thing getting in the way of them being able to take ownership of the property. That somehow by killing the owner's son will allow them to take ownership of the vineyard. Like that just doesn't make any sense at all. And yet, this is exactly what happens to Jesus. The religious leaders, these chief priests and the teachers of the law, they've spent their lives studying God's word. They've studied the Old Testament, the law and the prophets and the Psalms, and they know that there is a prophesied Messiah, a chosen one that God is going to send, and he is going to be their deliverer. He is going to be the one that sets them free from oppression. And they're expecting this great military leader. And yet when God sends his son, when he sends this Messiah, what do the leaders end up doing? They conspire to kill him. They were so bent on keeping power that they refused to even consider that Jesus might be the Messiah. They were so focused on doing it my way that they refused to even consider living Jesus' way, a life of humble, obedient submission to God. And so these religious leaders hatched this plan to have Jesus arrested and brought up on these trumped up charges and then executed by the Roman government. And so as Jesus goes into the conclusion of the parable, this audience that is listening to him, the chief priests and these teachers of the law, when they hear what he has to say in conclusion, the meaning will not be lost on them. So let's pick it up in the second half of verse 15. What then will the owner of the vineyard do to them? He will come and kill those tenants and give the vineyard to others. And when the people heard this, they said, God forbid. And Jesus looked directly at them and asked, then what is the meaning of that which is written? The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Everyone who falls on that stone will be broken to pieces, and anyone on whom it falls will be crushed. So these religious leaders who were listening, they knew exactly what Jesus was saying to them, and they did not like it in the least. While they couldn't disagree with what was said in the parable, I mean, obviously, the owner of this vineyard had every right to do to the tenants what he did based on what they had done to his son. He was in the right to be able to take justice into his own hands. But these leaders who were listening were absolutely horrified at what this would mean for them, what Jesus was saying would happen to them, that their power was going to be taken from them and it was going to be given to somebody else. And their response was like, no, like that can't be right. And so Jesus says, well, then how do you explain this? And he quotes from Psalm 118. The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. You see, the future of God's people, and again, not just the Israelites, not the Jewish people, but God's people was going to go beyond one nation. It was going to be extended to the entire earth. The future of his people was going to rest upon belief in Jesus. Jesus is the cornerstone. Jesus is the one that the Jewish leaders rejected, and they missed the building block of the foundation of what it means to have a relationship with God himself. Now, for us today, it's super easy to get all judgy about these religious leaders because, I mean, they're supposed to be these religious leaders and they're conspiring to kill somebody. Like that's just not right. Like, and we feel justified in judging them because I would never do that. And sure, we can all say, yeah, I would have never conspired to kill anybody, much less the Son of God. But while we never have done what they did, in a lot of ways we have, because just like the religious leaders, we've all chosen to do life my way. That's ultimately what we want, right? Is we want to live life my way. And when we live life my way instead of God's way, it's called sin. Now that's a 3-letter word that we just think that's way dirtier than any 4-letter word out there. The idea of sin and, don't tell me what I do is sin, but really, again, anything that we choose to do our way instead of God's way is sin. And it's not like I'm just pointing the finger at you because I'm pointing it at me and everybody. We're all in the same category. We read the following in Isaiah chapter 53. This is something that was written 700 years prior to the birth of Jesus, a prophecy about what he would endure. Isaiah 53:6. We all like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. Did you catch that? Each of us has turned to our own way. Why? Well, just like the religious leaders in the first century who were seeking to kill Jesus, we don't like to surrender our own power. We want to be in control of our own lives. We want to be able to do life our way, and we think that's our right. I should be able to live my life however I see fit. But I think deep down, the reason that most of us, or many of us, don't want to do it God's way is because we can't really predict how life is going to go if I do it God's way. If I surrender control to him and do things his way, like I don't know what's going to happen. At least when I'm in control of my own life and I'm doing things my way, I can reasonably predict how things are going to go. Now, I can't predict how everything's going to work in my life. I can make plans and they don't always work. But if I do things God's way, I really have no idea how it's going to turn out. Or we believe that if I do things God's way, I'm setting myself up for a life of misery. It's just going to be too hard because God is going to ask too much of me. I mean, if I do things God's way and I can't go out and get drunk or get high, how am I going to have any fun? You know, if I do things God's way and I give a tithe to the church, if I give 10% of my income, there's no way I'll ever be able to afford my bills. Like, I'll end up homeless. I just there's no way to do it. You know, if I do things God's way and I say no to having sex before marriage, how am I ever going to find a spouse? Nobody's going to be okay with that. You know, if I do things God's way, I'll miss that promotion at work because everybody else bends the rules to get ahead. And if I do things God's way, I won't be able to do that and I'll never get promoted. I'll just be stuck where I am forever. And we can get so caught up on what we think we'll miss out on when we do things God's way that we forget what we might be able to experience by doing it His way. So don't miss it. I can only discover the good God has in store for me by living life His way. And so no matter where you are, no matter when you are watching this, wherever you are, you can take a step today in discovering the good that God has in store for you by doing it His way. And so I first want to address those of you who are curious to what does it even mean to live life God's way? Like, how do I even start that? And as I talked about before, it begins by placing your faith in Jesus. It begins with that cornerstone of the foundation, by putting everything on Jesus and trusting in Him. And it all comes down to what you believe about Jesus and His life and His death and His resurrection. And do you believe in that? And if you're ready to take that step and you're saying, I'm done doing things my way. I want to try doing it God's way. I want to live God's way. I want to place my faith in Jesus. If you're there, now please fill out that online connection card. Head to RVCC Plus and you can fill that out and we would love to talk to you. I would love to reach out this week to give you a call or email and we can sit down and get coffee or whatever. I would love to do that, but you may not be in a place where you're ready to have that conversation. And that's okay. If you're not ready for that, I would encourage you to learn more about Jesus then. If you're not ready to talk, or if you're not like, I'm not quite sure that that's what I believe yet, then I would encourage you to spend some time in the Gospel of Luke, to read through Jesus' life and write down questions that you have, and then maybe later on we could talk or meet, or you can meet with somebody else maybe that you know goes to church. But I'd encourage you to get to know more about the life of Jesus, because again, His life and death and resurrection is the very cornerstone of the Christian faith. Now, if you're already there, if you have placed your faith in Jesus, if He is the Lord of your life and you have begun living God's way, there is always a next step that you can take in faith to discover the good things that God has in store for you. And for you, perhaps that next step is just deciding, I need to start engaging in community with other believers, with other followers of Jesus. And maybe to this point, like, your relationship with God has just been really you and God and maybe one other person. And I read the Bible and I pray, but in terms of being in community with other believers and being vulnerable about your life with others and allowing them to be vulnerable with you, and we don't like that word vulnerability, but just to be able to be real. Let's use that word, just to be real with other Christians and kind of how you're doing in your relationship with God. It's such a healthy thing, and yet it's something that so many of us just kind of want to say no to because that could get uncomfortable. But I want to encourage you. Maybe now is the time to take that step. And we want to be able to help you jump into a community group or some sort of a class or one of our rooted groups where you can start connecting with other believers. And if you want to do that, again, fill out that online connection card, and we'd love to start you on the process of getting connected into a group. Maybe that's the step of faith that you need to take because you'll discover some amazing things that God has in store as you're in community with other believers. Now, maybe for you, maybe there's this sense of like, yes, like I want to live life God's way, except for this. Like maybe there's that one area that you're still holding back, that I want to be in control of that area, and you know it's something that it's not even right to do. Like, I've been lying about this area of my life, or I continue to kind of cheat and cut corners in this aspect of my life, or the way that I talk about this person, like it's not really right, or I'm just holding on to something, it's a stronghold in my life, like pornography or something like that, where it's like God can have everything, but I can't let go of this. And you're afraid to start trying because you don't think that you can do it. How do I stop doing this or this or this or this? Like there's no way I'll be able to stop that for the rest of your life, from the rest of my life. And I want to encourage you, you don't have to worry about stopping something. I'm going to do it God's way the rest of my life. Maybe just make a commitment today to him that, God, I want to try it your way for today in this area or this area or this area that I've been holding back from you. Maybe that's the step that you need to take. Just for today, can I do it your way, God, in this area? And perhaps for you, maybe you've been walking with God a really long time and you are close, you're tight with him. But for the past weeks, months, years, decades, or whatever, there's been something that God has kind of put on your heart, something big, and you felt like God kind of tugging at your heart, but you've always kind of, as a pastor mentor of mine said, like you've always kind of like just kind of stiff-armed him in that area, like, okay, like I know that's kind of where you're leading me to, but like I can't do that, like that's too big, that's too crazy. I don't know how it's going to turn out because it's so big and it would just upheave everything. And maybe your next step isn't just jumping into it, but maybe it's, okay, God, I'm going to take some deliberate time alone with you in prayer, and God, make it clear to my heart. And whatever you put on my heart, Lord, help me to take that step. God, because I know you have good in store for me. And I felt you leading me this way. God, would you just confirm that to me? And if you confirm it, God, I'm going to take that step. It's not easy, but following Jesus was never meant to be easy, but it is the best way that we could live. So as we close out this series, all the parables that we've studied in this series, they've really all led us to the exact same place. You can live life my way, or you can live life God's way. And I want to encourage you to release control, surrender that power that the religious leaders couldn't release. Take a step of faith and discover the goodness of living God's way. Thanks so much for joining us in this series. We hope to see you again here soon. Hey, I'm Mike, the digital ministry pastor here. If you like what you saw today, we invite you to click that subscribe button and hit the notification bell to be updated on everything we have going on here. Also, if you need prayer, if you have any questions, or you just want to reach out, be sure to email me at mikep@rainierview.org. Thanks again for being part of the RBCC family today.